Hola, ¿cómo estás? Espero que estés súper bien. This is Tamara Marie, host of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. Now, before we jump into this episode, I wanted to let you know about a special opportunity that you're definitely going to want to take advantage of, especially if your goal is to become fluent in Spanish. For a limited time only, my team is opening the doors to listeners of the podcast to take advantage of a free language coaching session. Now, in this session, it's not just we're teaching you about verbs or grammar, but we're really going to do a deep dive into what are your goals for learning Spanish, assess where you are on your journey to fluency at the moment, and help you map out a 90-day plan for how you can get to fluency. So we are going to help you take your Spanish to the next level, whether you're afraid of speaking Spanish or you just get a little bit nervous when you're talking to native speakers, or maybe you've got some of the basics down, but you really know that you struggle with getting your Spanish to flow and your listening skills aren't up to par. Whatever it is, even if it is a specific grammar issue, we will help you map out how to tackle that. And normally these sessions do cost, so we are offering a few slots for free. There are limited spaces available and they'll only be open up through the end of the month. So make sure you sign up. Go to SpanishConSalsa.com/coach. That's SpanishConSalsa.com/coach to book your free language coaching session where we will help you map out a 90-day plan to get to Spanish fluency. Okay, let's get started with the episode. When you think about the Caribbean, when it comes to Spanish speakers, you probably think about Cuba or Dominican Republic or Puerto Rico. But did you know that the country of Colombia also has a Caribbean coast and a large population of Afro-descendants? In this episode, I'm joined by Kim Haas, who's going to share with us her travels highlighting Afro-Latino culture throughout the country of Colombia. Make sure you stick around to the end of the episode to find out where you can catch new episodes of Afro-Latino Travels with Kim Haas, where she shows you all of these amazing places in the country of Colombia highlighting Afro-Latino culture. Entonces, vamos a empezar. Let's get started.
Bienvenidos! Welcome to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast, the show for Spanish learners that love music, travel, and culture. Close your grammar textbooks, shut down the language apps, and open your ears to how Spanish is spoken in the real world. Let us show you how to go from beginner to bilingual. Here is your host, certified language coach, Tamara Marie.
Hola, bienvenidos al episodio 184. Welcome to episode 184 of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. In this episode, I'm joined by Kim Haas. Now, Kim has embarked on this project to highlight Afro-Latino culture throughout Latin America. The last time I spoke to Kim, she had just wrapped up her trip to Costa Rica, and she shared a lot about Afro-Latino culture in the country. So if you missed that conversation, go back and check out episode 93, where Kim talks all about her travels in Costa Rica and all of the Afro-Latino culture in the country, which most people don't think about. They think more about maybe seeing some wildlife and doing ecotourism, but a lot of people don't think about Afro-Latino culture in Costa Rica. So definitely check out episode 93 if you haven't already. But in this episode, we're going to talk about Kim's trip to Colombia. So she traveled everywhere from the coast of Cartagena to Cali, which is definitely known as the capital of salsa. But you probably didn't know Cali is famous for other types of authentic Colombian music that Kim will share with us in this conversation. I know that you will enjoy this episode, and make sure you stick around to the end so you can find out how to check out her show, so you can see and hear and experience all of the places that she traveled to and highlighting different aspects of Colombian culture that you probably are not familiar with. So I know that you'll enjoy this conversation. I enjoy talking with Kim. Her energy is infectious, and she really is passionate about highlighting all of the positive things that people of African descent are doing throughout Latin America. So without any further delay, here is my conversation with Kim. Thank you, Kim, so much for being here on the podcast. I know It's been a little while since we spoke, and you've been doing some amazing things. So I thought it was great to have you back on to catch us up on all of the travel that you've been doing and the new episode you have of your show airing currently right now, so everyone can check it out to make sure that they don't miss all of your amazing adventures throughout Latin America. So if you could just kind of start out before we dive into the new season that's coming out, just remind everyone, just tell us a little bit about you and how did this project Travels with Kim Haas come about?
Well, thank you again for having me. And as I said, congratulations on all your wonderful growth. It's fantastic. So I was always interested in Spanish. And since my grandmother took me to Acapulco, Mexico, Viva Mexico, when I was like 6 or 7 years old, and I remember being in the hotel lobby, and a perfect stranger came up to me and asked me, hey, do you want to learn your numbers, how to count your numbers? Uno a 20, 1 to 20. So I learned Spanish, right? So I said yes. And I said from that moment, I was hooked. And I wanted more Spanish, more culture, more language, more travel. And from middle school, high school, college, I lived in Spain junior year abroad. I lived with the Pantoja family. It felt like I was the fifth Pantoja child. And because they treated me so warmly, just like I was family. And then I returned to Philadelphia. I'm originally from Philly. And I started meeting more and more Afro-Latinos and getting involved in one of the programs at Taller Puertorriqueño, which is a museum in Philadelphia dedicated to Latino arts and culture. And so meeting all these people who look like you and me. And I was like, I knew about the transatlantic slave route, and I'd studied it for a little bit in college. And then I'm starting to meet all these people from Venezuela, my friend Evelyn and Edgardo from the Dominican Republic, and all these people from throughout Latin America who look like the two of us. And I said, wow, I want to learn more about this and travel. And so that's what I did. I started traveling to all these countries and meeting the chefs, the artists, the painters, the writers. And that's what I love, the arts. And so that's kind of how I got started on this journey.
Wow, that's so amazing that you really got started through your own experience and discovering, right, what I'm sure was not covered in your Spanish class, which I had a similar experience that, oh, there actually are people of African descent in Latin America. And I think it's interesting. So I actually had a similar experience. I went to Brazil, which technically is part of Latin America, even though I speak Portuguese because it's one of the languages. But a lot of people do obviously speak Spanish in Brazil as well because it's in South America. But I remember going to Rio and being struck by how many people just thought I was a local. And they would be saying, você é carioca, which is like, are you from Rio de Janeiro, like from the area? And I had no idea. And I like to thought of myself as educated. But like going to Rio, what do you see? The Brazilian supermodels are all light skinned with green eyes or what's portrayed. So I honestly didn't know that there was a huge population of people of African descent there in Rio and that I blended right in. So yeah, I think that to some degree, traveling is so important because it gives you that experience that no one can take away from you, right? If I hadn't gone to Rio, I wouldn't have known, not just sort of from a book perspective, but like this visceral knowledge of being in that place, in that space with the people there, looking at people that could be my cousin or my auntie and just being in there. It just changed my whole perspective in a way that I don't think you can get formal education. So I wanted to just ask you about it a little bit too, because I think it's really interesting. Like when I first started learning Spanish and I became exposed to the culture, one of the things that was very clear to me is that those of us who live in the United States on the mainland here have a different history, obviously different language, but also a different view of that history and of race in particular. And I remember it being such a touchy topic of even acknowledging indigenous roots or African roots and people just saying, well, we're all Spanish. And I just felt first approached it very much with my own perspective, like these people are just in denial, right? And then I started to learn more about the culture and understand there's a lot of reasons why things were different there. The history is different. The way slavery was instituted in these different countries was not the same as it was in the Jim Crow South, for example. So it is different. It doesn't make it better or worse, right? But it is different. So can you explain like how you've just sort of evolved to be able to even acknowledge Afro-Latino? Because I think that term even of itself, some people may view it as something that comes from the outside. And then there are, I think, more people that are from these countries that are embracing their African identity and are identifying more. But I think it's more of a term used in diaspora. So I'm just curious to your experience with that and your evolution of understanding of race in Latin America as you're embarking on this project.
Well, I mean, those are really fascinating comments and ones that I can definitely relate to what you were just saying, the commentary. And going to Brazil, when you see so many people who look like you, and like you said, and then you're looking at the textbooks, you're looking at magazines and television, and you're like, well, where are these people that look like us that I just saw in Rio, that I just saw in Salvador, which is the capital, considered the capital of Afro-Brazilian culture. 70-80% Black and brown. And as you were saying, because I love Brazil, it's fascinating. And the great majority of Brazilians have African ancestry. So we're talking about 53, 54, 55%. And that's, again, researchers saying could be conservative because it depends on how people acknowledge. If they know, sometimes they may not even know that they have African ancestry. So it's complicated, right? As I say, it's complicated. But I think what I've seen, and again, I'm African American. I do not, as far as I know, have Latin heritage. And I say that again, as far as I know. But I think what I've seen in the 10 years ago when I came up with the idea for Afro-Latino Travels, nobody was saying they were very few people were saying they were Afro-Latino. People weren't even using that term. And I'm talking about in the United States. And so it was something that people weren't talking about it, weren't using it, weren't saying it. It was rarely coming up, but I knew that I wanted to try and celebrate these people that I met in my travels that I wasn't seeing on Spanish language television at all. And still barely so if you watch TV now. I mean, they're still great boys. So I think that it can be very complicated in how people see themselves, and so much of that is based on what they grew up with and what the culture and the history around that says. And for the most part, being of African descent in Latin America was not something that you wanted to be or acknowledge. And that's for centuries. So when I talk to people and I say, hey, this is like brainwashing over centuries. This is not going to change overnight. We have to change people's thinking about what it means to be Black in Latin America, and that, or not just Black in Latin America, but Black period. But that's a movement that is centuries of changing what has been part of our, every breath and every part of the cells and the DNA and everything is about, it's not okay to be Black or to have African ancestry. So we're trying to change things, and it just doesn't happen overnight. But I would say what I like is what I'm seeing now is, like you were saying, in so many countries, I mean, there are movements, again, and it's not like it didn't happen before, but I think it's building. And so you're seeing in Costa Rica having its first Gypsy Campbell, first Black vice president. Now in Colombia with Francia Marquez, again, first Black vice president. I say that every place we shoot, there becomes the first Black vice president. So I'm like, wherever we go next, it's going to be, But I think, and you're seeing more and more people are saying, hey, I'm proud. I just learned that I had African ancestry, or that mi abuela or mi abuelo was Black. And that's, I think, due to DNA and technology. So all these things are kind of coming together, and social media, and I think having hopefully a really positive effect on how we see each other. And in the end, it's all about embracing our humanity as just human beings too.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that you've seen some evolution in that, because I think I've seen something similar, and whether or not people perceive if it's something that's coming from the countries themselves or if there's been some external influence, I think the fact of the matter is we're in a global society. Being Latino is really, in my mind, an identity of the diaspora anyway, because if you're in the country that you're in, you say, I'm Venezuelan. You don't say I'm Latino, right? Like until you leave or you're talking to people from other places, it really is not even part of the conversation. I think a lot of that has to do with not just people in Latin America, but people in the United States that haven't traveled, haven't been outside of their neighborhoods in many cases, let alone their city, state, country, to even have this level of awareness, to even have these conversations. So that's why I really appreciate being able to talk to you about that, because you actually have branched out, you've traveled, you've dived into it, you've had your own experiences. So let's get into that, because I am super excited about your latest excursions here to Colombia, because back in 2019, and what I still call the before times, right? Like before we all went through our collective trauma that we're still in denial about, I actually was in Cartagena, Colombia when I launched this podcast. So this is near and dear to me. And it was another experience that I had in Cartagena. But yeah, tell me, why Colombia, and how did that part of this project come about? Because I know you did Costa Rica before. And so how did you decide to go to Colombia this time?
Oh my gosh. Well, if you haven't been to Colombia, for our listeners, please do go. It's a really just fascinating country. I mean, I love all of Latin America. So I always say, people ask me, what's your favorite country? And I'm like, it's like picking a child, right? You can't have, well, I have one, so it's easy for me to say. But so I had just had this idea for Afro-Latino Travels for years. As I said, it was over more than a decade, just trying to get it shot and produced and funded. And so all these places throughout Latin America were always on my list. And Colombia is right up there. And I knew that Colombia had a real significant Afro-Colombian population that I really wanted to spotlight. And I've been to Cartagena several times. For your audience, if they don't know, Palenque is about, an hour, 20 minutes, something like that, outside of Cartagena. And it's one of the oldest, or if not the oldest, Afro-descendant town in the Americas. And so runaway enslaved people founded this community, and it's just a real fascinating place. And so if you go to Cartagena, I think it's worth the trip to go to Palenque and see how they preserve the culture and the people in a real sense of community and music and language, palenquero. So anyway, I can easily digress. But Colombia just has so much to offer, and I knew about the significant Afro-Colombian population in Colombia. And so I was really drawn to that. And when you think about all the different types of music, Colombia is considered a land of 1,000 rhythms. And the African footprint, the African rhythms are heavily tied to those. And so we know about salsa and cumbia and vallenato and all these musical traditions. And so much of it, again, has been touched by people of African descent, which I just find absolutely fascinating. And so you can go to Cartagena, which was one of the port cities for bringing in enslaved people of African descent. And there's also Cali. And then so we shot in Cali. Mm-hmm. And people may not know Cali as well. Cartagena is kind of one of the major tourist destinations for Colombia. The Cali is on the Pacific region of Colombia, called the Valle de Cauca, this whole region. And it's an amazing place. And it's considered the center of salsa, the world capital of salsa. So I do a little salsa dance.
Okay.
And we go to the Salsa Museum, El Museo de la Salsa. And then how can I forget this? One of the biggest festivals in Latin America, and it's a cultural festival called, do you know, Petronio? Congress Festival? Well, it's held in Cali every August, and it's a celebration of Afro-Colombian traditional music. That's how it started off. So people are playing the marimba, and I love the marimba. And it's just, to me, it's like this calling, right? To me, it's just really special, and it has its own uniqueness. And then the traditions, when you talk to the marimberos, when you talk to the people who play the marimba, I mean, they're third generation, second generation, fourth generation. And so there's a spirit of passing down also that I find really fascinating. And so I love hearing the marimba. And I have to tell you this, we were shooting in a restaurant in Cali, and we were interviewing one of the marimba players, and he's playing the marimba. And then all of a sudden, this woman comes out of the kitchen, because she told us she's Afro-Colombian, and she said she heard the marimba and she was drawn to it.
Wow.
And so she had to come out of the kitchen. Her name was Amanda, and I loved her. She came out and she starts dancing. Wow. And by the end, she and I, the two of us are dancing, everybody in a restaurant. And she said how much she just appreciated that we kind of honored her music, and that it was appreciated. It was so lovely. We're almost on tear crying. And it was just beautiful. So that's Cali. You're in San Cipriano, this reserve. It's a natural reserve. It's beautiful. It's Afro-Colombian. And the only way to get into San Cipriano is on what they call a motobruja. So it's a motorcycle with a platform, and you go in. That's the only entrance into San Cipriano.
Wow.
And so they're working, it's fascinating to preserve and keep it's green and gorgeous everywhere. So if you're in the I'm around New York City, so I love this area, but I thirst for greenery, right? So if you're looking for sometimes just to relax the mind, and San Cipriano is just a lovely place to get back to nature. And then we also shot in Buenaventura, which is principal port city of Colombia. 90% of its products come in through Buenaventura, predominantly Afro-Colombian. So they had some real issues. And so we did some shooting there, filming there, which was pretty magnificent also.
That is amazing. That sounds like a trip that I want to take, honestly. Because I've been to Cartagena, I've been to Palenque, but I have not been to Cali. And I'm curious about that because, like you said, Cali is known as like the capital of salsa. And for those of you who don't know, so the salsa in Colombia in general, like Colombian style salsa, tends to be a lot faster pace, I would say. There's a little bit of a different style than what you may have seen traditionally if you've been watching like Dancing with the Stars or something like that, or even just gone to a salsa dance studio here in the US. The caleño salsa is like a whole different vibe, and I love the energy of it. And I did take some classes in it before because we had an instructor in my hometown that was from Colombia, and she taught us a bit, but man, you need some stamina to dance Colombian salsa. Tell us a little bit about that, the music there, and you also mentioned the music outside of salsa, but talk about just that musical tradition in Cali and what you saw in the Salsa Museum.
So the Salsa Museum is just this really cool space with photographs of salseros all over the walls, and I had an introduction to salsa with Carlos Molina, whose father started the museum, and Carlos is amazing, and he attributes so much of salsa and its base foundation to the African rhythm, which I love. And then he's so animated, so he tells me on the segment too on Cali, he's like, I'm gonna give you a master class, and so we're working on the beats and everything. But it's just a great place to go and get either a foundation or learn more about salsa. And then I had a lesson outside with Brian Galvez. He's a salsa dancer, and he started his own foundation. And he's doing wonderful work to really spread the joys and the goodness of salsa. And he's like, salsa is like breathing for me. It's like the breath. And I was like, oh man, that's fundamental, right? When you talk about something as the breath, that's the basis, right? And so it's a good time. And it was a great chance to learn and to kind of be in touch with, I think, what makes Cali, or one of its things that it's most known for, is salsa. So it was a lot of fun, and you can see that all in the Cali episodes, of Afro-Latino Travels.
Awesome. Yeah. And that's one of the things I would love to do is just like go dance salsa in Cali. So tell us a little bit about, because you mentioned before we started recording here that you had the opportunity to do some singing. And I always laugh at when people say, oh, the podcast is, Learn Spanish con Salsa. And I go, yeah, I like to dance, but I'm not a singer. And if you hear me singing, it's probably because I'm in my car in the shower and no one else hears me. So I know I would be intimidated to sing if I was in Colombia, but tell us about your experience with that and how that came about.
First of all, when I say sing, something came out of my mouth. No, it was, and I should try to clarify, because I feel like I was singing backup. But Nidia, so we have a segment in the second episode featuring Colombia, and Nidia Góngora is an Afro-Colombian singer from Timbiquí, which is one of the Afro-Colombian indigenous communities in Colombia and in this Pacific region. And she's an amazing person. Look at the singer, but she's also a humanitarian, and so she's doing all this wonderful work, and she's got a school to help displaced children and families, and so she's doing so much great work, because displacement is also an issue in particular with Afro-Colombians because of land rights issues and so forth. But so Nidia, we did a segment with her, we interviewed her at her restaurant, and let me tell you, she has the best empanadas I think I've ever had. You can still taste them, and that's like a year later. So savory. They were just amazing. And so anyway, so we're talking, and we interviewed, and then she sings because she's here. So we're in this room they call the sanctuary, and two of her singers were with her, and she was sitting. We were all seated on the floor, and she's up front, and they were in the back. So I come on the side, and they just start singing one of these songs, and I just joined in because it was like, el niño quiere jugar, el niño quiere bailar. So jugar, pretty easy for me, but it's just lovely. And so I sang a little backup and really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun.
That sounds awesome. Another thing I hear when travel in general, right, can be stressful, can be difficult, especially if you're traveling outside of the country. And I know a lot of people might have this idea that, oh, are these places really safe, right? Is Colombia a safe place? Because there are some things that, unfortunately, Latin America is famous for that aren't necessarily positive. So for you, did you find safety a challenge during filming? And also, if someone came to you and said, Kim, this sounds great, I watched the show, it looks amazing, but I don't think I could go to Colombia, I don't feel like it's safe, what would you say to them?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I think Colombia, remember, had a reputation being not such a safe place because of so much of what was going on with the FARC and the wars that lasted decades. And so there's still some of that, I don't say rumor, territory, or those thoughts out there. People are traveling to Colombia, they're finding out that it is safe, that people welcome them. I always say you want to check your sites, your sources before you go somewhere. If you decide to go, you want to check and make sure that things haven't changed maybe since the last time you went, or if the people are from the places and they can tell you, yes, it's safe, no, it's not at this point, or yes, go here, but don't go here. We also, when we travel, we work with the tourism boards of the particular countries. So we work with ProColombia. So these are Colombians who know their cities, their towns. And so they'll tell us, hey, we can shoot here, but only until this time, and then we've got to go. Or we can't shoot here, or yes, this place is fine. So definitely helps to talk to, even if you're not with, obviously, the tourism board, it helps to talk to people who are on the ground, who live there, who have some sense of the areas. I think that's really important. But I think in general, you can travel throughout Colombia. There are right now particular areas, unfortunately, many of the areas where the Afro-Colombians are in the Pacific that are experiencing tough times because of the narco drug trafficking, because they're right in that route. So as Nydia said in the interview, it's not internal. The challenges that these towns like Timbiquí are experiencing unfortunately, with violence are not of the towns, but it's coming from outside. And so those areas, unfortunately, where so many Afro-Colombians live, you want to take your precautions. You want to read and see if it's okay to go and talk to folks. But in a place like Cali and Cartagena and Bogota, I think you can go and travel there. So you take precautions like any place. Don't stand out with a lot of money, counting your money and do things that attract attention. But I think you can go and feel comfortable and have a great time.
And let's say I only had, 48 hours. Out of all of the amazing places you went, I know it's hard to pick. I'm asking you an impossible question. But let's say I only had 48 hours. Where do you say, where are the, let's say, 1 to 3 places I absolutely should go?
So I still love Cartagena. I think Cartagena is amazing. This is so Cali, of course. Let's see. I love the Salsa Museum in Carlos. So go see Carlos and tell him I sent you. The Salsa Museum, because I think it's really cool. And get a salsa dance lesson, but you've got to listen to Marimba. So you want to make sure you have a chance to do that. You can go during Petronio Alvarez, the annual Afro-Colombian Festival in August. That's a real treat, and that gets you really seeped into Afro-Colombian culture. So that's another one. San Cipriano, if you want to kind of take it back and get back to nature and get off the grid, because you will be off the grid. San Cipriano is lovely and so green, and the people, I think, will welcome you. So let's see, it's hard. And then if you want big city, though, obviously you can go to Bogota. There's lots there to do. So, but I like Cartagena. I like the Rosario Islands. Did you go there?
No, I didn't.
Okay, so right off the coast of Cartagena, just, it looks like paradise with those just turquoise blue waters. And we went on a boat trip, just an excursion. Off the coast of Cartagena is lovely. So there's lots to do and enjoy in Colombia, and wherever you go, I think you'll be in good shape.
That is awesome. Well, you've definitely added some things to my bucket list. So Kim, for those who are listening, can you let us know, where can we check out your show? Where can we see all this amazing footage of the amazing people that you met in Colombia?
Thank you so much. Yeah, so you can check out on Afro-Latino Travels with Kim Haas, and the show there on PBS on its lifestyle network, Create TV. So you can check them out there. We have the Costa Rica shows airing as well as the Colombia. So you can get one, all four, or depending on your location, how they're being broadcast. But the best thing is probably to check your PBS location and find out when the shows are airing, because they air at different times according to the city location. So it's not one standard time across the country, so it really varies. But that's a good way. You can check our website, travelswithkimhaas.com, and we often have the listings, the air dates for different locations on the website. But I think it's a real pleasure and honor to just try and share the spotlight, put a spotlight on Latin America's African descendants, because let me tell you, they do some stuff, and for centuries that to me is just mind-blowing. And I just feel such honor, so inspired by Latin America's African descendants and all that they have created to make Latin America, I think, so incredibly special. And they deserve to be honored. They absolutely deserve to be honored and appreciated.
And I definitely appreciate you for shedding that spotlight on Afro-Latino culture, because it gets people to see it in a way that, again, you could talk about it, you could read about it in a book, but there's nothing like actually going there and having the experience. And the next best thing is when someone like you brings in the camera and shows us that experience and shares it with us all. So very grateful for your work and hope you continue on. Do you have any other trips planned for another season or another country you're going to visit?
We always got, it's always something each year.
Okay.
Yeah, we're hoping to be we're seeing right now if it's going to be Brazil. We were hoping to be in Brazil to shoot. But there's much of Latin America to cover, and I say we're just getting started. So we'll see there's a lot to get the shoot off the ground, but we'll see where we wind up. But Brazil is one that we're working on now, so.
Oh, that's awesome. And I'm still waiting for my invite for the next shoot, because I'll definitely, I will take any excuse to travel that I can.
Well, anytime, and if you don't mind me sharing that, we started tours. So if people are interested we took a group last year to Costa Rica, following in the footsteps of the TV shows, the Costa Rica episodes. And so that was really wonderful. And we're going to probably do something for Colombia and do another Costa Rica tour next year. So they can always reach out to us if they're interested in getting to know Latin America through a tour group, because that's one of the things that we're going to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we'll definitely put links to all that in our show notes too. And if you're on our email list, we'll send out the info as soon as we get it from Kim, because when I went to Cuba, I went with a group as well. And normally I like to travel on my own. I'm an independent traveler. But places like this, one, for just safety, but two, just for the experience of really not having to figure all that out on your own. And especially if the trip is curated towards you actually experiencing the culture. That to me is very valuable. But generally, I'm not a person that likes to go to the resort and sit up again there. I'm like, I could just go to Miami if I wanted to sit in a resort and go to the beach, right? I want to actually meet people and experience the culture. So if you haven't done a trip like that before, I definitely encourage you to do something that is more in line with the culture and not just sort of like a standard commercial tour, because you'll actually have a much better experience and you'll have a group of people that you'll be with. So if you're a solo traveler, it's really the best way to me to travel in groups, especially places where you're not as familiar. And regardless of your level of Spanish, you'll be able to practice something there, and having that group gives you a little bit of security there as well. So you won't feel like you're stuck somewhere and you're like, oh my gosh, I need to look up this entire local dialect, right? So absolutely.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think it's good points that, and we really try to, and I think did hopefully accomplish that, is by making it really cultural. And so, we had Quince Duncan speak to the group. He's one of Costa Rica's most revered authors, and a cooking class with Afro-Costa Rican. So we'd have to get right into the culture and meet people. It's I think, the perfect way.
That is amazing. Well, thank you so much, Kim, for taking your time to share about your experiences with us. And I hope that some folks will check out the show, and hopefully I will also be able to join you on the next tour. I am not counting that out. So you might see me in Brazil or Costa Rica next year too. Okay.
We always count you in. You always have a spot. And I just say, keep it up, because this is so important, your work, and how much we really appreciate it. And getting the importance out of learning other languages and learning about other cultures is magnificent. So salute and just keep going.
Okay. Muchas gracias. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Kim. And if you're like me, I'm pretty sure visiting Colombia is now closer to the top of your bucket list of places that you want to travel. I definitely enjoyed my time in Cartagena, and I'll be sharing more on the podcast about some of the unique words and phrases that they use in that area of the country. Because I too was blown away by my visit to the city of Palenque that we talked about briefly, but it really looks like, from people who have traveled to different places, I'm told that Palenque looks very much like a town in West Africa. So they really have preserved a lot of African culture there. And it's just a fascinating place to visit. There's so many places, like Kim said, in the country of Colombia that are definitely worth checking out. But make sure you first check out Kim's show so you can kind of get a little behind the scenes view of some of the places that you might want to visit. And you can do that on our show notes page, learnspanishconsalsa.com/184. That's learnspanishconsalsa.com/184 for episode 184 of the podcast. And we'll also include links to the other episodes that we did with Kim, where she talked about her trips to Costa Rica. And make sure that you check your local listing so that you can watch Afro-Latino Travels with Kim Haas. Always, I hope that something you heard in this episode has helped you go one step closer from Spanish beginner to bilingual. Hasta la próxima.
Thank you for listening to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast at learnspanishconsalsa.com.